Hi, welcome to the Indie Wine Podcast. My name is Matt Wood, and this is episode 32. I recently spoke with Ryan Stirm of Stirm Wine Company at his winery in Watsonville. Since his first vintage about 10 years ago, Ryan has become really well known for his multiple Rieslings from the Central Coast, working with great vineyards like Kick On Ranch and Warriors Vineyard. He's also perhaps the foremost producer of Cab Pfeffer, working with the Soleto family vineyards as well as Gemelli Vineyard, which was originally part of the historic El Gavilon Vineyard. He makes some wonderful zins also. We discuss how he got started and some of his most exciting moments in winemaking. Ryan is very open and thoughtful when discussing the ins and outs and challenges and pleasures of running a small winery, and I think you'll really enjoy what he has to say. Here we go.
Honestly, like every aspect is important. Like we all have to sell our shit, and it's not as straightforward as a lot of people think. I mean, I fucking sucked when I started at selling anything, of just like, you just think it happens. It's like, how fucking naive was I? And obviously like the bigger you grow, the more that like gets a little bit more complex, even though you get better at the things that you do. But to sell volume, like you do have to occasionally make videos so people can like, well, maybe just stumble on you and know that you exist.
Right.
There's like 80 or 100,000 brands in California.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why does anyone care about you?
Right.
You know what I mean? For sure. And that's like,
unique or jump out to somebody if they're searching.
Yeah. And it's like, you have to, people have to know that you exist, for sure. And they need to know that you offer something that is maybe not unique, but it offers them value. I was just so like naive when I got started. Cause I guess to back up, like where I got started, I just picked enology as a major when I was deciding like what to do or what to study at Cal Poly. So I was, when I was in high school, like applying for college or whatever, my primary goal, like I guess, obviously just to get a degree, like I had no fucking clue what I wanted to do. And I wrestled in the schools I was applied to. I was going to wrestle. And I chose Cal Poly, and they had the winemaking degree, and a few of my buddies I grew up wrestling with also were from Healdsburg, and their parents were in the wine business, and they chose that major, and I just picked it because I knew them and I thought it sounded fun.
Yeah.
So it was like having a few friends. Maybe I just wanted to guarantee that I was going to have a friend when I got to Cal Poly.
Yeah, you know some people. You're not going in there on your own.
Just a little scaredy 18-year-old, I kind of just picked it without too much thought. I really liked food.
Okay.
And that kind of came back to wrestling because part of the sport is cutting weight. And
right.
So you're just, especially as a teenager, you're like dreaming about food all the time when you're starving.
Yeah.
And dehydrated, So that was like the initial boost that sort of like sent me in that direction. And enough so I was like, wanted to study it and get into it. And when I got there, I think I just kind of had a direction more into like plants and soil science. Okay. And so I ended up getting a degree in, both viticulture and enology.
Okay.
And because they are separate at the university level, at least, I think at Cal Poly and Davis, you kind of like pick which direction you're going to go. You're sort of, the degree is designed to help you get a job at like Gallo or J-Lore, and I've worked for both those places. It was like on the Cal Poly track. So like when I was there at Cal Poly, my first internship was at Gallo. I learned to drive tractors for a summer. And then I did another summer internship with J-Lore. And all I did was take leaf samples to see their water level to make irrigation decisions. I had nothing to do with the decisions. It was just going out every day, taking certain leaves off each block of their vineyard to see how stressed the vines were to make irrigation decisions.
Okay.
And that was like an entire summer of that.
Did you prefer that to being driving forklift and
No, that
everything?
sucked. I fucking
Okay.
hated that job.
Okay.
It was like it was boring as fuck. It like, I loved being outside, but I hated that job. The driving tractors with Gallo was a lot more fun. And then like when I was at JLore, I was like, oh man, I'm over it. Like this, like, yeah, it's a job and you're getting paid, but like it was not fun. I ended up getting a job at a small winery called Sausalito Canyon. And I did an internship there like my senior year. I took like a quarter off of school. And I mean, I loved that. And I didn't know I'd be that into the winemaking side of things.
Was it just working for a smaller
Yeah.
kind of family run
Yeah.
winery that
They're-
you think made you
Yeah,
enjoy
they're-
it more?
I think, well, yes. I mean, even though it comes with like all the challenges of being on a small team,
Yeah.
you know, there's like the potentially a little bit more drama involved in a family business, kind of like I'd say most of the time. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a ton because
Yep.
you're kind of like, it was off the grid. They
Okay.
had super old vines, I think planted in 1880.
Wow.
So it was like one of the older vineyards I've come across on the Central Coast. Now they had replanted a few other things since then, but it was just like a lot of fun. And I was like, oh yeah, I could like definitely do this.
That smaller family run winery, you're kind of probably pitching in and doing a lot of different
Yeah.
tasks, and you're not just picking leaf samples where every day is
Yeah,
the
I-
same exact day.
I don't think I picked a single leaf sample since my time at JLore
Yeah.
for that particular reason. That was 2010. In 2011, graduated. I met Justin Willett, who owns Tyler Winery in Lompoc.
Yeah. Great one.
Me and him met rock climbing in Santa Maria at this like one random spot that like 3 people regularly climb at. And him and I at the time did. And I still like, I really didn't know anything about like good wine at this point.
Okay.
You know, like I did obviously work a few jobs, but like I didn't like wine and I didn't really know what good wine was.
Okay.
You know, I just really hadn't experienced that thing that other people had experienced, even though I tried, you know, supposedly a bunch of good ones. I ended up working for Justin as an intern in 2011, and he introduced me to like Burgundy. And that's like
Okay.
the first time I was like, oh, dude, wine is like really good. You know, and that
Yeah.
was like definitely the gateway drug for me. Like that, just having harvest lunches with him, because we'd open good bottles every single day. And that was like the best kind of education that I had up to that point. Even though I had a degree, it's like the degree is kind of like the getting your foot in the door so people know that you're like serious about doing it.
Yeah. I've spent time learning this.
Yeah. You know, like I wasted 5 years of my life and a bunch of money to like say I'm serious about doing this. And that's kind of like all it does. Because you don't need a degree to be a winemaker. You know, like I use almost nothing, or I'd have to really like think hard to think, what did I learn in school that I still actually apply? And there's not a lot
Okay.
other than contacts. You know, like alumni camaraderie and all that. I mean, that was probably like the most beneficial part,
Okay.
which is, I know it sounds like not that cool. It is important, and it has been like beneficial over the years. So that I'd say that, and it was a lot of fun. Can't like deter that. Like it was still, college was cool at that time. That was like the tail end of college being like cool, and it was still cheap. It was, when I started, it was $1,500 a quarter.
It's not that anymore.
It's got to be like 5 to 10 times that cost now. So, yeah, it was just like a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of my lifelong friends I met there, you know, so like that's definitely worth something. You know, you can't downplay that, but the education part, obviously debatable.
Were you at Tyler when you made your first vintage?
I was.
Okay.
So like 2011 harvest intern, and then finished up there. And then I got a job in Australia for the winter following that harvest in Margaret River.
Okay.
And that like primary objective for that was just the region. I wanted to go surf.
Okay.
because it's like epic.
Yeah.
You know, like that part of the world. I mean, most of Australia has good waves, but Western Australia specifically is pretty uncrowded, beautiful, and has amazing waves and good wines. But a lot different than here or anywhere else I've been.
Okay.
You know, like the topography is pretty. I wouldn't say it's boring, but there's not a lot of mountains or hills.
Okay.
You know, it's relatively like flat or slightly rolling.
Not a lot of like defining features
No.
to it.
Like this would be like the biggest mountain around,
Yeah.
like by far. But it was a beautiful, like it was so pristine and so nice and a lot of fun. So I worked
Okay.
at a giant winery down there, and then came back and had a full-time job with Justin, and was his assistant for the next 3 years after that.
Okay.
And then I started my brand in 2013. But I mean, you say started, dude. I made 100 cases of Riesling from Santa Barbara, and the reason I just really liked Riesling.
Mhm.
That was it. No other thought, other than like really no one was making it, and maybe that should have been a clue into how like poor the sales were going to be once I started making it and being in business. My naivety shone through yet again. But you know, little did I know in the long term that would actually be a huge boon. So it's okay to start really, really slow.
Yeah.
I had the opposite of I feel like a lot of brands that are created because, like, let's say the wave of like new natural winemakers that like has picked up steam over the last like 5 years. A lot of those wineries are all doing almost the same thing, you know, and you might be like the hot ticket item for like a period of time and start out really well. The problem with that is like when you're not the cool thing anymore is like,
Mhm.
how the fuck do you stay in business? Not just relevant. How do you just stay in business?
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of my colleagues have had experiences like when they start out doing really well and then they start struggling hard, because it is a lot harder than meets the eye to not just like sell anything, but like sustain it and grow it. That's the hard part, and finance it. So like there's on the independent side, like if you're doing what I and a lot of other people are doing.
You find is it most difficult getting that distributor and getting the wine into stores, or more the DTC part, or is there a part that really jumps out to you as?
I mean, I think I'm thinking back when I was getting started, just meeting people, having the
Okay.
contacts, like
Okay.
from the background that I had, like just on the production side, I didn't know anything about selling anything. And so
Okay.
like I didn't even know where to start, even though Justin introduced me to a lot of people. It's still like I was dumb. And then pricing is another big thing. Like a lot of wineries, me included, when I started, priced things like what I thought was fair. And it's like,
Okay.
that's just shouldn't, I mean, you can get away with that, but like, it's also just dumb. Like there's no rhyme or reason other than you think it's fair. Doesn't mean like anyone cares or thinks it's a good value. That's just like you putting some like arbitrary figure on it. I mean, that's just like a common mistake. And I'm just kind of rehashing like the things that I did that sent me on the path that I'm on, sort of.
Yeah.
And that like having, I would say, not significant challenges, because fuck, I only made 100 cases my first year, but like learning how it was just a lot different than what you expect. And then you have to sort of adapt and plan a new strategy. But I started out really small and I never really grew that fast. And that was, I think, pretty helpful. And I had a job as an assistant. So I was able to make my first 2 vintages for free, essentially, while I was getting paid as an assistant. And that was hugely beneficial for sure. Because like takes out an enormous amount of risk.
Right.
Not that a lot of people like me are doing, like starting out with their own winery year one, because that's just not feasible. But after that second year in 2014 with my brand, after harvest, because it ended really early, I went over to Austria and worked harvest there because it started late.
Okay.
So I did like 2 in 1 season.
Nice.
Came back, at the time, believe it or not, like me and my wife, we had bought a house in Santa Barbara on the salary I had with Tyler. I was making 38,000 a year.
Okay.
And I bought a house on the west side for 465, and we flipped it and sold it like 2 years to the date after we bought it. And that was like the initial like boost to start my winery like a little bit more proper.
Okay.
And so like all the equity we made, we like moved up here, and then I leased out a spot on the west side of Santa Cruz for a year to make wine, and then moved here in 2017.
What initially drew you to Santa Cruz? Why?
It just seemed like there was opportunity.
Okay.
And not that I knew what that opportunity was, but it seemed like there was opportunity.
Okay.
So there was like, I know I just skipped over like 3 years, but in that time I left Tyler.
Yeah.
I moved the winery to a custom crush in Santa Maria for the interim for like 1 year. I drove Uber and worked at Thomas Fogarty.
Okay.
All kind of like juggled. That was like 2015 into 2016. And then my first like real actual winemaking jump was doing custom crush. And that's when I like bought a lot of the initial gear that I had.
Okay.
And still have to make wine for other brands. And that was like enough. I mean, not really enough, but like enough revenue to help like pay off the initial loans for the equipment.
Mm-hmm.
Me not necessarily getting any paycheck, but enough to get going. And so 2015, I made like 450 cases or something. In 2016, I think I made almost 1,000.
Okay.
And then did that for like 2 years. And so kind of stayed at that level, built up a little inventory, and then kind of learned a lot more about how wine sales worked. I would say it took until like 2017 to really like start selling a decent amount of wine.
Okay.
Where I sold, I mean, maybe it was 2017. I think probably took that long to sell like over 100K.
Okay.
Like, which is still nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you think about it, it's like that sort of pays for the bills that you have currently, maybe, because you're always like playing 2 years behind.
Yeah.
So like, you know, we sort of paid through 2023 at this point, but we're selling 2021s and 2022s and receiving them still. So it's, you're always like playing that catch up. And that's where a lot of starting out winemakers, like they don't know that math yet.
Okay.
Because that's where it gets tricky. Like even if you can pay all your fruit bills, you have bottling costs too, you know, and it's got to come from somewhere. And then you got next year's fruit bills right on top of that, you know? And so and if you want to grow, which is, it's sort of important because generally speaking, if you're not growing and you're just staying stagnant, like you kind of are stagnating a little bit, not necessarily, but
I mean, you have to grow to a certain size just to be able to really make a viable business
for sure
and living.
Yeah. To be able to like
it.
function and, do all that. But yeah, so 2017 moved here, and then this was already a winery, but like we have changed like quite a few things about it.
Okay.
And it's a relatively decent setup for what we do now. And then, I'd say 2018 through, I guess until 2020, we shared the winery with a few others. And so like 18, 19, and 20 was like pretty hectic in here. And then 2021 onward, it was just us.
Okay.
And that's been like amazing. A lot less stressful.
Yeah.
You know, it takes a while to like get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, it was actually my goal for like years to be doing just this. You know, I have to like remind myself sometimes, like when you're at a custom crush or you're sharing your winery that like you worked your ass off to get a lease for and set up, and there's like other people just like here all the time and getting in your way. Like you're ready to like make the move as soon as possible. That's why you see like so many winemakers like bouncing around from place to place, because it is really hard to get your own space and be independent. Like that is part of the crux of my size of business is like figuring out the financials of it. Cause there's not like one straightforward way to make it work. Like if you can get investors, great, do it. That obviously comes with some costs, depending on how you structure it. You can get loans if you can get them. And obviously that comes with its own set of costs and
its
everything.
own issues.
And own issues. And if you're able to finance it on your own, it's a gigantic risk. I don't think people who do that are necessarily lucky. I mean, you could say they are, but it's a fucking giant risk also. And so we've done a mix of loans and self-financed.
Okay.
Everything. So I just personally have shied away from investors.
Okay.
Just so I retain control of the company.
Yeah.
And that's always been important for me. So I can make the decisions about what I want to do when I want to do it. Always. And it keeps things a lot more open that way.
So are you glad you started with the Riesling after all?
Yeah. No, it's not just started with it, but have continued with it. And I would say it helped me in a lot of ways that were unexpected. So obviously, like anyone, I mean, especially thinking back to what got me into wine, it was Burgundy. It's you're making one wine from one vineyard. That was the coolest concept. And exploring all the little nuances of how to make the best wine from a site, how it's reflective of a site, all that was super cool, especially for someone like me who, I got a minor in soil science and I was going to get a master's in it at Cal Poly.
Okay.
So I was really into that concept. The fact that it was so hard to sell meant that I had to kind of look at it in a new light and maybe think a little bit more outside the box. From the standpoint of we're producing something and the raw materials are so important, right? The grapes are the most important thing. There's a lot of really good Riesling in the Central Coast, especially up here. And one vineyard in particular that has a ton of old vine Riesling that I work with out in San Benito's Wurs.
Right.
And there's for a long time, all of it was sold to giant wineries and just went into white blend, blah, blah, blah. So sort of not taking a page directly out of their playbook, but one year, I was fuck, I made probably way too much Riesling from Wurs, way more than I could sell.
Okay.
As Riesling. Not no matter what the price, but I don't operate on the level of I'm just going to drop the price just to fucking drop the price to sell some wine. That's also not a smart business decision. You need to make the right margin for what you're creating. But we sort of knew that hey, we have good raw materials. Maybe we just need to repackage the wine a little bit.
Okay.
And so I think in 2016 was maybe 2017 was the first year we made rosé. And that was 95% Riesling and 5% Zin. It could be any red wine,
right,
for color, and that went really well.
Zin from Wurs also.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it was just a single vineyard rosé, but just making it completely backwards.
Yeah.
Starting out with white wine and just coloring it up, but that was allowing Riesling to be able to take advantage of the fad of rosé at the time. And it had all of a sudden the idea of versatility.
Okay.
It could be all these different things. And so, I mean, I guess since that point, have started to look at wine a little bit differently and try to get as much of the highest quality things we can, regardless of if they're going to sell or not. And it's important to have good raw materials. And our job as winemakers is to make it, well, for sure taste good, but also make it really interesting. And it needs to be interesting from a taste and a story perspective. It's that was the first time I had to just look at wine a lot different than however I originally planned on my business being.
Okay.
And so obviously we still make plenty of single vineyard things. That has not gone away. But a lot of the volume of what we do are blends of things, right, and priced appropriately so people can drink them on a more regular basis. And so we kind of like shifted how we thought about wine and just added that new component to it. So we still do all the same things we did before, and they still sell, at a glacial pace compared with, like things like rosé.
Okay.
Not that rosé is like still booming, but like it's an important part of the winery.
So those are like the calcite and the neptunite
exactly
lines
for sure
of wine.
And so we made like 25 tons of Riesling last year.
Okay.
And that's all for Stirm. And overall, like I think Stirm crushed like 62 tons, something like that.
Okay.
So
yeah, third-ish.
Yeah. It's like
Riesling.
more than a third, like damn near half of the production is Riesling. And yeah, it's really good fruit and it's hard to say no to it. And the price is right. So the trick is figuring out how, like, just to get it in front of people to try it. Because if it's in a Hawk bottle and says Riesling, then it's like game over.
Okay.
You already lost. Riesling has like the biggest fans, I would say, of like almost any variety.
Right.
Just not the most of them. There's like a small amount of like super nerds, and they're way into it. I'm one of them. I drink proportionally probably about like the same amount of Riesling as like we produce. It's like every third bottle I drink is like probably Riesling, and even like the sweet stuff. Like I don't shy away from that. Like I love drinking cabinets, Spätlese, any style of them, dry or sweet. So I'm like, and all the different countries, I'm like into the new world stuff as the old world stuff on it. Like I really do like to see how people work with it. It's just as engaging as Pinot. It's just the styles are way more all over the map.
Right.
But yeah, it's a versatile grape, and like I said, the raw materials are the most important part. And so like the winery as a whole does that. So like we also make a ton of Cab Pfeffer.
I was going to ask you, that's the other one that your winery's kind of
for sure
really associated with.
Yeah. I mean, and those things like Riesling, the other benefit is like, since no one can sell it, it's always available. Like Wurs now is like hard to get fruit, but like when I started with him in 2015, it's like I could just buy whatever I wanted. Like last year, it's like almost, as much as I want to take.
Okay.
I could have picked a little bit more than I did, but I also can only fit so much volume in here.
I was going to ask you if you've seen any more competition. It feels like Riesling is more than maybe when you started, but still not it's at a level that
you would think.
I guess
you would think like
competition.
It would be more competitive, but it's. I think it's two things. It's like a rising tide does sort of, in this case, lift the Riesling boat because there's been an interest in it from like small wineries who get a little bit more publicity and like restaurants and like small shops that put more of a focus on it and tell the story of what you're doing. And so it gets out there more than you'd like think from like the corporate standpoint, like selling Riesling in a big volume that's American. It's like that would get competitive. It's like you're competing with Washington State all of a sudden, and like you're not going to win. At least not in California. Like our costs are too high to be able to like really compete. Like J. Lore, I think they do a lot of similar things, and they just put it in some white blend or put it in their Chardonnay. Just use it as vitamin R.
Right.
And that makes a better Chardonnay or makes their white blend better and keeps the cost low. Because it is like, it's a pretty versatile grape to grow. It yields like fairly well. And even if you get rot, it's like you still make good wine out of it.
Right.
Like very few other varieties like you can say that about. It suffers more just from its name. A lot of American consumers especially just inherently think it's sweet. And it's a turnoff for them, even though they might actually like sweet wines or like wines with a little bit of RS. They won't admit it, but it's just associated. It's got a bad name.
I know some folks, sometimes it's 90% or more Riesling, but they call it a white wine, even
Yeah,
small producers.
for sure. I mean, and I get it. It's like you want to remove the barriers for a sale. And if like that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do. It's not like not upholding any like sanctity of the craft by like naming it something different.
Yeah.
It's like it's a pretty minor thing to do. But I think reframing it in your mind that like, hey, just to get people to try it, like you might need to change up how you're sort of serving it to the public, just to get them to try it. And usually they have a positive experience and they're more pleasantly surprised than they'd think. And that's been great. That, and if you're able to have it by the glass, and then people will actually try Riesling, especially if it's like sold to them by a server or, who has like a story with it. So it does take like a lot of extra work and it's slower, but in the long term, a lot of people know Stirm just for Riesling and ask about it. Like today, same thing, had someone reach out and like, hey, heard you make good Riesling. Like can you send us samples and, put one on by the glass probably. And so it's like that. I feel like if you're willing to stay in the business for a long time, then people will find out you exist if you're consistently putting out something that is like exceeds expectations. So luckily the expectations for Riesling are always low. And so it keeps the barrier a little bit low. Yeah. But I think the proof, is in the bottles. Like the wines, like they age like exceptionally well.
Sure. Yeah.
We haven't even like touched on that, but I would say that is probably the most interesting part about it. And we just live in a time where it is a little bit more challenging to be able to sell library stuff for if you're trying to like hold on to a volume of it to be able to sell it later, because it just adds a lot of cost. But like wine quality wise, like it's awesome. We can I'll go grab like a few older ones. We should try those.
Okay.
See how they are. Yeah. It's got a lot of versatility. There's so many different ways you can go with it. And so it's been a huge part of my business and still is.
Yeah.
And because it does so many different things. Out of the 25 tons, we'll probably bottle like 600 cases of Riesling as like actual Riesling. So that'd be like 10 tons worth. So we're not like making like not tons of volume of anything.
Right.
But the sort of mixing things up, and it gives us a lot more flexibility to sell.
Yeah. It has such a long history in California and makes amazing wine, but there is kind of a consumer unwillingness. I guess, like you said, maybe it just requires a little more kind of hand selling to get it to people.
It does. And that's, essentially everything you make is going to require hand selling at some point, and I guess the funny thing is now it's like, it's not harder to sell Riesling than it is to sell Pinot. You have way more competition when you're selling Pinot.
Right.
Like, how do you stick out in that crowd? And like, that's lucky I'm not in Sonoma. I ended up where I am just because this is where I could do what I wanted to do without really even knowing it. It just had the most opportunity. And things like Cabernet Pfeffer, there was like, you couldn't sell that fruit in 2016. There was like 3 winemakers who were into it, like in the world,
Yeah.
And now everyone wants to make it, and that will probably end at some point, because it's also has a limited market. There doesn't need to be oceans of that made, but like I've had people reach out all over the state who are like trying to either get cuttings or buy fruit up here. So it's still exclusive to San Benito County as a cultivated on like acreage, but I'm sure there's going to be new plantings of it elsewhere just because it's a solid grape and it makes really interesting wines.
And you work with, it's the Gemelli vineyard for it a lot, which I think that was kind of the first one in San Benito.
It was, they're all kind of, I don't know which one was the first or not, but depends on like who you talk to and like what literature you read.
Okay.
The Enns Vineyard supposedly was planted in 1895.
Okay.
And the original blocks on that vineyard were Zinfandel and Cab Pfeffer.
Okay.
All those blocks are field blends. And so they're
Okay.
predominantly Zin and predominantly Cab Pfeffer, but there's also like Cabernet Sauvignon, Cab Franc, Alicante, Muscat, Palomino, the old shebangs of all the old shit was in there. And then Gemelli, there's a photo of the vineyard from 1908, and it's not brand spanking new at that age. So, somewhere in that time. And Wurs, the oldest vines on the property were planted in 1902, 1903.
Okay.
And so the old Pfeffer there, I think, was planted in the 20s. So kind of a mix. And then there's other vineyards nearby with other things. Like there's a block of Nicorette that goes back to, I think, like 1857 or something, just down the road. But the Pfeffer, as far as I know, came to California in the 1870s.
Okay.
And was propagated and sold out of a nursery in Saratoga.
Yeah.
By William Pfeffer. And he just named it after himself, obviously, because it was a good way to market the nursery and what he did. But Pfeffer was planted in the Santa Cruz Mountains, supposedly, and then also San Benito. And it came from Bordeaux, and it's, no longer commercially planted in France. I think it's just at a germplasm repository like it is at UC Davis, if Davis even has it. And it's called Morteau in France. But I think there's a few different clones of Cabernet Pfeffer between all the sites.
Okay. I was going to say, like, the origin story of it is probably one of the most like convoluted and crazy origin stories. Like, is it this grape? Is it this grape? Is it this grape? Was there a previous version of it? Or
I think because of the fact that all the old blocks have so many varieties in them. Okay. And, if you understand that area, it's like what vineyard manager's like going to send in, or farmer is going to send in their material to UC Davis to get it verified.
Yeah.
And I think some of the winemakers who have gone in and like sent in material pulled cuttings from other vines that were not the actual Pfeffer in there because, like I said, there's like 6 or 7 varieties in the block.
Right. So you just like pull in a couple random sticks and send them in.
Yeah. And if you're not able to read the leaves,
something different. Okay.
Then, like could be sending in the wrong stuff. So that's why there was so much confusion, I think, for a long time. But it's similar to, I think, a few other varieties. Like it looks like physiologically like Trousseau. Okay. But the wine tastes nothing like it. And the fruit doesn't really look like it. It's similar, but not the same. And then I think there's another variety like called Mancine that it's similar to. I don't think that's like planted at all in California to my knowledge. But as a variety, it does relatively well in San Benito. I think last year was the most I've ever seen it struggle, and it was struggling just to get ripe.
Okay, in 2023?
Yeah, in 2023. Okay. Like, because it's usually like warm enough and plenty of heat units to like build it up and get it over to the finish line, but it struggled last year. It's susceptible to like bleaching from sun. And so like late season, usually up here we get heat waves in September, and that if the fruit is unprotected, then it can get bleached. Okay. Last year, the canopies were so big from like the vigor that we got, and there was a lot of fruit hanging, and it just struggled to get ripe because it was like uncharacteristically cool. Okay. Like September was I think like one of the coolest in like a decade or more. Okay. It was just, it was not like the rest of them.
What initially drew you to Cab Pfeffer?
There was no interest in it.
Okay.
I think like one of my old colleagues at Tyler was like, some fucking guys making like Bastardo or Pfeffer, like some shit. And I was like, I had no idea. Like yeah, I didn't even think I'd make Zinfandel.
Okay.
You know, like I was like Riesling and Pinot, like I'll just do that. You know, it's what I like. And then moving up here and seeing the old vines, I'm like, oh yeah, like why the fuck would I not work with all this stuff? It's like way cool, tons of heritage. It's unique to California. And that also is like, has become like quite a big thing. I think a lot of small California wineries struggle to make themselves as Californian as you can. Like we all, and me included, have emulated people in France or Austria or Germany or like anywhere else, like as inspiration, right? Like you kind of like, oh, I love what this guy's doing. I'm gonna like be like him. And that's okay to do because like we're all guilty of it, dude. We all look up to someone else.
Yeah.
But I think as a brand and what you focus on, it's like, to me, it's really cool to have regional specificity, just like it is in Europe, you know, for all those guys like doing what they do. Like, obviously we have a smorgasbord of varieties that are planted here and a lot less history, but you know, there is history here, and that's, you know, we're able to like work with it, live it, breathe it, see it here in San Benito and Santa Cruz and Monterey in a different way than like Napa and Sonoma or Paso, you know. Honestly though, it's like, it's definitely not the most stressful job. You know, there's plenty of times like shit in your pants. I'm sure you've seen like a few of my colleagues on social media just like, oh, I'm out of money and this and that. All of us go through that. We're all fucking broke at certain times, and it sucks when you are, but like that's part of owning your own business and doing something you love.
Yeah.
Making, you know, whether I don't call myself an artist, but it's like, you know, these are like art projects. Yeah. You know, essentially, and we're lucky to be able to do them. So I understand it's a fucking privilege to be able to do it, and it's hard occasionally, but it's really not that. It's not that bad. It's way more stressful shit in the world. Like I could sit here today and, you know, talk to you, and it's like not bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, there are shit sandwiches to eat, plenty, and it is risky.
There's always something, huh? Running your own business. Like,
yeah, for sure. Dude, every single day.
If there's not something, then you're waiting for something.
Something will happen. Yeah, I mean, and that's part of like, I think the excitement and the draw of it too is like this vintage, for instance, like, you know, shaping up to be epic. And I think the wines are really good, but a lot of winemakers also won't admit like how challenging it was in certain vineyards, especially I think you had to have a really keen eye to know what was going on, because since it was so cool and humidity was so high, there was a lot more botrytis than met the eye in a lot of varieties and on a lot of different ranches on stuff that like you wouldn't think would really get it. Zinfandel is notorious for getting it. So that was not unexpected. Riesling usually gets plenty. If it's like, it's not like more susceptible than Zinfandel, but like if Zin gets it bad, it's like the crop is like ruined. Like, cause it can spread rampant, because Zin has like the very thinnest skins, and they swell up, and the clusters just like ooze. They naturally do that. And that's why like when Zin ripens, like it'll raisin up real fast, because it kind of like dehydrates quick. And you know, with the conditions we had, there was a epic amount of rot in certain blocks of Zin this year. And so like we didn't get we just didn't make as much as we normally would have. You know, I'm not going to name names, but like specifically when we're picking that stuff, and I know there's like a lot of rot, because, you know, I went and sampled this particular vineyard probably 10 times. You know, within a month, I was out there all the time, just because it was not really that close to ripening. And like the rot was already starting to get bad. And so like we had to do a few passes of we dropped 70% of the fruit that was hanging before we picked. And then on harvest day, like we were supposed to get 10 tons and we ended up with 1.2
Wow.
basically.
Okay.
And so like, it is terrible, but it's like,
Yeah.
I'm still of the mindset of like trying to make it work, even though it's like, it seems doomed. And we at least got 1.2 tons instead of 0. And it made a good wine, but it took a lot of sorting and throwing out a ton of stuff.
Yeah, a lot of effort to get there.
A lot of effort, you know, and like if you didn't do that, then like you're just going to make vinegar.
Yeah.
Like no matter if you inoculated, no matter how much sulfur you added, it's like it was vinegar on the vine. It's like you're going to make vinegar in the cellar. And so you have to, I think these kind of vintages in time will separate out who like did a good job, you know, because it takes effort on each stage. You know, like, yeah, say you're not farming anything, like you still need to get your ass out there and sample and understand what's going on in the vineyard. And there's a lot of wineries who are really good at that. And then there's some who don't put in that effort and they just pick stuff when it either tastes good or the sugar's high enough or the acid is where someone wants it. But if you really want to make good wine, like you don't really need to pay attention to the numbers, but you do need to pay attention to the vineyard and the weather and be able to pick a time that is appropriate given what the conditions are for that year. And then know ahead of time pretty much how you want to and how you're going to make that wine, given the parameters of that year. And so like usually we do a lot of whole cluster with Zin and Cab Pfeffer. This past year we almost did none.
Okay.
In the stuff that had rot. It's just like we have to destem everything and sort the shit out of it.
Okay.
And so, and that's specifically because of the rot. And like, yeah, the wines might not be as like cool and flashy as they could have been, but they're clean.
Yeah.
And they're still really interesting because we had good ripening conditions. And so like it just, I think it show like when challenges arise, like it shows who has a better grasp of the whole thing. And conditions are easy, like anyone can make good wine. But the challenge is like making something exceptional when the conditions are really good. And like that's what you should be doing. And that's also just as hard as like navigating a challenging time. And so we've gotten better at executing no matter what the conditions are. You know, better at each stage, like better at sampling, better at sorting, better at strapping the bins to the trailer, better at loading the press, better at cleaning our gear, like the whole thing, you know, being more efficient at it and keeping the program like a lot more dialed for what we do. And that's allowed us to like keep growing, but also like not just like keep growing, but like actually make better wines than we did when we were making less.
Yeah, grow and improve.
Yeah, and like that's a lot harder to do. It's like I said, anyone can make good wine in a good vintage, and you know, 5 times out of 10 in California, I would say you'll have a good vintage, and you should be making something like good to exceptional in those. You know, we haven't had fire issues in like 3-4 years, so you know, out of 10, it's like almost there already. And I would say almost everyone would call like 21 a good vintage and 23 a good vintage. 22, yeah, we had like a lot of heat. The wines are still really good, but like nothing exceptionally challenging about it other than there's heat waves. That's normal.
You're doing a lot more farming also, right? You farm some of your own sources, so you're out there quite a bit. Seeing the vineyards?
Yeah, I would say yes and no.
Okay.
Because like we did at one point farm like 32 acres.
Okay. And
that was when we were just getting started out and didn't have like much of an established winery. So like, I think I was telling you about like 2016, 2017 time. I was like, started with doing custom crush. And that was like my first like jump to be able to do everything. At that same time, I also started farming vineyards for other people.
Okay.
And that was that was really fucking hard and not lucrative in the slightest. And so I modified that to just farming For Stirm, trimmed it down to about 6 acres.
Okay.
That vineyard has since sold, and now we just have the 2 acres I planted here in 21.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
for now, this is the only thing I'm actively farming,
Okay.
which has been a boon because I can focus on this. And yeah, I mean, it's like your baby. I planted it.
Yeah.
You know, and so like you have a different understanding of a place when you plant it out. You know, because it just you're starting from a different point, and you know each vine on a different level. You know the field a lot better than you would like if you just came in and had to like relearn everything. And you're able to do things exactly the way you see fit for the 50-year plan. You know, and so whether or not, like I don't own this, I just lease it.
Okay.
And so you know, if I don't buy it, then it'll go someone else. But it's still, it was something I wanted to do and learn. And like, it's not a huge risk, even if I do lose it, because it's only 2 acres. And this has been another good learning opportunity, like farming had been also previously. And it'll hopefully keep me ready to, like, if and when I do buy like a more substantial place.
And so this vineyard you planted to Albarino, ferment, and
It's mostly Vermentino.
and Vermentino. Okay.
Yeah. With in 21, I knew the vineyard I was farming was going to sell
Okay.
that year. And so we like, farmed it through 21, planted this that same year. So I knew I just wanted to plant it out because this had been fallow and I was like, it's in the winery's backyard. And one of the things about farming is like, you want to be close.
Can't get too much closer than
Yeah,
this.
yeah, for sure. And it just makes it a lot easier to like do all the tasks you want to do.
Yeah.
And so out here, the real boon was the proximity and the fact that it's like very fertile and it's in like the rest of the Central Coast. This is a great climate for growing grapes.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of a no-brainer to put that out. And white varieties we sort of specialize in at the winery. Like we still produce about 2/3 by volume white wine. And that's just kind of how we've always been. I think it makes it easier during harvest for us to operate because, you know, we don't have a ton of like room to ferment like tons of reds or the volume space for it. We have like these redwood fermenters and then like a shit ton of boxes out there. And so like in a couple of times this past year, everything was full.
I was going to ask you about the redwood fermenters. Yeah. Did they come with the winery space or okay?
So JP, who started River Run, he had this. He said these were built in the 60s.
Okay.
And so no one makes new redwood tanks, to my knowledge, because you need old growth heartwood.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
For the tanks? Okay.
And so like the wood itself, you know, like you go over and there's like, you know, no knots in it.
Yeah.
It's like kind of perfect. You're like, oh yeah, it looks old and rustic and beat up. And they are, like, no question about that. But it's still like high quality redwood. These things swell up, no problem. Like they're good to go for harvest pretty easily. They're a labor of love, I would say. Like they're a shit ton of work. And my assistant, he fucking hates having to like work with these because
just swelling them every year or just everything about them.
Everything, because like they're like everything's manual. Like we can dump, we have a bin dumper, but like the dig outs are manual.
Yeah.
The thing I like about them is they hold big volumes, and for, you know, they get fucking hot because they're getting blasted by the sun until like 1 p.m. During harvest. And so they're just, ferments like cook out there pretty good.
Okay.
But they cool down quick. So they have like a fast cycle. And so we can like kind of get a lot of things through. Like
you can turn them a couple of times.
Pinot, we usually do like 8 to 10 days in those things. They're just manual. They're really fickle to work with, like to get them to hold liquid. Like see the bands on there? They're like ancient. And just like getting the bolts to tighten without like snapping things because they're like rusted together is kind of hard. And then obviously we have boar beetles and things like that out here, but those are living, breathing vessels and they're funky. And they definitely like they definitely make the wines like rustic.
It's old school California.
Yeah. It's tannic. It's stinky wood. Like it's got a fungal kind of a vibe to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like a mushroomy. I would say like not inherently like super woody, but tannic and has like a deep, savory, earthy kind of fungal mushroom kind of shebang kind of going on to put it mildly. Yeah, they're just, I mean, no one else is using them. No one's making them. And so it's just like working with a piece of our history. And that, like I said, part of like working with the varieties that have a long time here, the techniques that have been here a long time, stylistically making wines like from certain parts of the past. I'm not like picking one time period in California and emulating it because I was not fucking alive either, nor have I drank any of those wines when they were first made.
Sure.
And so like, this is all speculative. I'm definitely not an authority on old school California wines either. I'm a winemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And I do know after doing it for so many years though, I have a pretty good idea of how people in the past made their wine in terms of how they operated, given the parameters of everything and talking to a lot of the old guys. And so that's kind of the art is like having respect for it, but also doing it your own way. Because like I still say I'm a modern winery. Like we have obviously tons of stainless steel.
Yeah.
We do have temperature control. We also have those fucking ugly ass redwoods that are still in service and like a press that looks like it's, from Soviet Russia. So it is important to like also do a little bit of like blazing your own path for your own brand. I think people find like a uniqueness in that and, grasp onto your story a little bit better, like doing things your own way and like being okay with it and not feeling the guilt of like having to keep up with everyone else of like how much sulfur they're using or not, or how natty someone is or not. And it's like, I don't give a fuck about anyone else's opinion of me in that sense. I'm going to do me the best I can. And I think more wineries, there are plenty of wineries who do that. And they're the ones who are successful. Like you don't like listening to what other people say is just like, you lost your own sense of like what you want to do. And that's like the most important part of like being an independent winery. Like you should be doing something different that is like important for you, whatever the hell that is. And like, who cares what someone else's opinion is of like how you operate? Really? Like that's not, if that's why you're in business, like, cause you cared about someone else's opinions, like you're going to fail every time. And you might fail doing things your own way too, but at least you gave it a shot.
Yeah.
And you're going to learn something about it other than like, oh, I tried to do this and it didn't work. Oh, I made this rosé and like it didn't sell. Or I made this Pinot. I thought it was priced well and didn't sell. It's like, well, who fucking cares? Like you have to make people care about what you do. And the best way to do that is to be yourself and do something different, whatever that is.
What's the most exciting thing for you about running your own winery or, doing this?
The most exciting?
I mean, it could be exciting in a uncomfortable way too, but.
I mean, the exciting parts are like having to make decisions that you did not anticipate.
Okay.
That's like exciting. It might not be a positive thing, but like it's definitely you're living in the present when you have a big decision you did not like plan on happening. Like my press, I have to look over there, is like it's like the heart to my press that is ancient, and it broke, a couple of pieces on it broke 2 different times last year towards the end of harvest.
Okay.
And we ended up pressing a few of our lots at James's winery, Flores, at the end of the year, and had a week where we just didn't have a press while I was in the shop.
Okay.
And so we had to like do a little extended maceration on a few of the lots towards the end of harvest. And it ended up not being a huge issue because we had access to a press, but also just had to change our winemaking towards the end of the year. It's like, okay, like these things we need to if we're going to have to maintain them for another few days, not knowing it's going to be a full week later that we have a press back. I mean, that's exciting. You're just like, okay, like everything I had planned for is now on hold, and we're not picking fruit for that week, not finishing up. We're just holding off for equipment malfunctions because like we can't just go buy another press at the end of October. You know, we just are digging our own grave at that point. And so I would call that like an exciting kind of a thing. And you're adapting in real time without having a plan for it necessarily. You don't plan for your press to break twice, you know?
Yeah.
But you should have a plan in place for when that happens. And if that happens, and luckily we had some neighbors and we're not like too off the grid and we're able to do it. And it wasn't a big deal. We've had plenty of colleagues do the same thing with us. Like when their press breaks, they've come on over here, we're helping out. And that's also like one of the best things about this business. Even if you are like competitive with someone, you have camaraderie and respect, and you're going to help because it's just like, it's going to happen to you at some point too.
Yeah. You're going to need the favor returned at some point.
For sure. Because it is like even big expensive pieces of gear break, you know, and that just, it happens literally to every single winery. Maybe not every harvest, but everyone's got a story about that. I would say that's exciting. Equally as exciting, but like not as fun or not even as fun to talk about is like if you're out of cash. That's always like shitty and also exciting. You're just like, well, okay, I have X, Y, and Z. It's like playing chess, right? Like what moves can I make on the board? And is it going to put me in a compromising position or not? And so, but that's a big part of the business too, to be honest, as an independent winery, if you're sort of like self-financed and running things, or you call it a paycheck to paycheck winery, you know?
Yeah.
PO to PO kind of operation. And yeah, I would say those probably, excited. It's also exciting just to see like bud break every year, as fucking stupid as it is.
Yeah.
It's a little exciting. You're like, oh, they're growing again.
For sure.
And then fruit set, veraison. That's always like a great time. That's actually, if I'm thinking about it, because it signifies the end of spray season. Whether you're organic or conventional or biodynamic, unless you're growing hybrids in like Nevada, you're going to be spraying, you know, like basically every vineyard in the world gets sprayed with something. And usually spray season is bud break to veraison as a general rule. And then after that period, you can kind of be done, unless depending on where you are. But for the most part, you're kind of done.
Yeah.
And I would say like occasionally there's issues that you'll have to spray after veraison, but our biggest issue here is mildew. I don't spray anything for botrytis to prevent it.
Okay.
But so we're done. Usually end of July, early August is like our last spray. And then we're done. And like here, kind of same thing. End of July, last spray, harvested in November. So you have like a long time in between, depending. Traveling obviously can be a lot of fun, but I'm always like a wreck when I'm traveling, just hungover and just not functioning at a high level. Or, you know, here, I do like just being here and working. Yeah. Like that's kind of my favorite thing to do. Pruning is probably like my favorite task.
Okay.
I think a lot of people probably say the same thing because it's easy. And like you're in a tranquil state of mind and place, and you get to be outside the whole day, and it's like this kind of temperature so you can work all day. And if you're cold, that's a good thing. You're not just like sweating your nuts off.
Yeah.
Weed whacking or hoeing or spraying or tying something. It's just like a nice change of pace. The seasonality of wine is a real boon. Having times of the year that are really busy and also having some downtime afterwards. I think it took a while to like understand how cool that was. Not unlike being a teacher, you know, in some ways.
Right.
It's like December, I don't have a lot going on.
Yeah.
which is great. January, I don't really have a lot going on.
Mm-hmm.
And then spring, it starts off pretty mellow. Like we have bottling and things, but and that doesn't mean there's like nothing going on the rest of the year. There's
Right.
always shit going on, but like you don't need to be on it like you are during the summer and the fall.
Sure.
Summer and the fall, it's like game on.
Yeah.
And spring is only game on because you have traveling on top of the other tasks. But like the winery and vineyard are not cranking by that point.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a full canopy, then shit is like you're busy all the time. And the winery is guaranteed to be busy because you're bottling everything you can before the next harvest,
Right.
making space and also trying to sell because you're about to be out of cash right when harvest starts, and then you need to start making all that up for those bills that are due right after you pick. So like, yeah, it's good to have like, the seasonality to it. It balances itself out pretty nicely.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of things I could talk about, but I don't know. I'm like not at like a weird point, but things are like relatively easy in some ways,
Okay.
which is I don't mean to say like just easy. Like I sort of know what I'm going to do for the most part.
Okay.
Obviously, a lot of unexpected things pop up all the time, and like that kind of dictates a lot of like how we operate. And I think I've always been, since I came up like under someone else's wing, I feel like that's something I definitely like doing for other winemakers. I do want to like help educate them, especially about the realities of the business. And I feel like it's important because a lot of people either gloss over certain aspects of it or they actually just don't know that well because they're not operating as independent as you would think. And that doesn't mean that like I don't have partners or help. Like I obviously have a partner in Los Chuchakis. I have a partner in Companion. And they both do different things. Like my partner in Los Chuchakis, he's like a national sales manager for Jose Pastor, for Stirm, for Los Chuchakis. My Companion partner, he's a graphic designer, and like those two things like cannot be overlooked either. Like he could make the world's best wine. If the packaging sucks, like no one buys it, like that's a bummer. I don't want people to like get like swayed out of like wanting to make wine because like it's so hard to like do all those different things. Like the reality is you personally don't have to do all those things. Like you can get help, but picking and choosing like good partners who are looking out for your best interest too is very beneficial and hard to find.
Yeah.
I mean, especially in the wine business, like it's such a ego driven pursuit, it's like your fucking name's on the bottle, and like it's important to try to like remove that layer a little bit because it's easy to attach your value to how your sales are going. And that can take you down not a great path in a lot of ways. And you might just need to tweak one thing about what you do to really like have a lot more success. And that is, it's hard to learn that one because it's fucking really hard to like make a change when you're set in a certain way. And so I think one thing that I've observed and learned is like having a dogma about something it usually ends up biting you in the ass.
Okay.
Like if you are strict about how you make your wine in terms of how much sulfur you don't add or like you do everything this one way, it's like you're usually going to fuck up something really bad because you're too stubborn and too afraid to try something else. And to make it in a real world with climate change, you have to be able to adapt like on the fly to everything that's thrown at you. And that applies to vineyard management, winemaking, sales, the whole thing, and even how you communicate as a business, and that is I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. I can find a lot of examples of people just being too stubborn. A lot of my friends, being too stubborn to change up what they're doing to a really big detriment. And, like it has consequences, like if you lose half your production because you have too much VA or something, like that's a catastrophic loss. Like you could be out of business.
Yeah.
Or probably will be out of business. Like I don't know how you recover from that. At least not quickly.
Right.
So I think adaptability and openness in regards to learning and trying things different is as important as being yourself. Maybe more important.
Okay.
Just so you can like have a business. And so that's, I would say, one thing we have tried to do a lot more of, instead of like, we need to make this wine to fit the criteria of this wine festival. It's like, well, who fucking cares about that? You just need to focus on doing the best job given what you have. And if it happens to be able to fit the parameters of what these people are looking for, great. If not, also great. It doesn't mean like you're any less of a person or winemaker because like you added a little bit of sulfur at the right time and you made a way better wine than like some schmuck who just talks and says like what they're doing is better because they didn't add or remove anything. It's like, is there any like actual real evidence beyond that like what you're doing is like inherently better? And it's like, no, I can show you a lot of evidence to say the contrary. It's like you're just being lazy and dumb and making vinegar, like it's easy to sell that mantra, but the reality is very different than that. And most people want quality shit. And that's the truth. Whether you're making it without sulfur or not, it's like, if you're bottling up dog shit, no one wants it. It's going to hurt your brand. And a lot of people do that. And I think it's important to like bring back the conversation about like quality. That's kind of like gone because of the opinions of like a loud few people, and it's not rooted in any truth other than like it feels good. Does that make sense? Or does it just sound like convoluted?
No, that makes sense.
Okay.
I follow you.
I know it sounds like a little bit harsh, but there's a lot of bandwagon type of winemakers who have the right intentions. They just don't have the experience and might not have the mindset to be able to change and evolve in the right way, to be able to put something out that's interesting or good. And like, why would you make a movie that like sucks because like you didn't add like you have like a great story and like you get like shitty actors, it's like the same thing. Or you have like really good actors and a shitty story. It's like, I think that's more common, like just to sell tickets, right? It's like fucking like Transformers, shitty story and shitty acting. Yeah, it does well for like a little bit, but like no one cares after the initial time period of it like running in the theaters. And like fad wine is kind of the same. Like are people still gonna like drink your wine 5 and 10 years from now? That's like where I want my business to be, is like the 30-year plan.
Okay.
And so you don't have to grow as fast. You don't have to be as cool. I'm proud of the fact that I'm not cool and I don't have to be to sell my wine. Like I don't need to be a caricature of like the most natural looking person of all time. I don't need to have like a full beard and wear a tunic and Birkenstocks and look like a wizard or anything, like I could do whatever the fuck I want. And I do a really good job at what I do. And that, I think that's a lot more important for building a business that is on that 30-year plan. It just is way harder when you're starting, and you're going to be in for just a tough couple of years starting out usually, but that's okay. That you want that when you're starting, because that'll help you get over the hump when things are actually like really challenging. And so, yeah, it's okay to have challenges. Everyone has them.
Mm-hmm. That's a good thing for people to know.
Yeah.
Winemaking or just life in general.
Yeah, for sure. And like you're gonna encounter challenges that seem insurmountable at the time. And like I can guarantee you every winery has plenty of challenges all the time.
Yeah.
Like it's the richest to the poorest. Like everyone is going to have challenges at their own scale that are going to be tough. That's not like no one's unique to it.
Yeah. Where are people able to get your wines?
Say that the easiest right now in 2024 would be on the website for direct access, because we can ship to 44 states.
Okay.
And in person, you can come down to the winery, and hopefully at the end of 24 or early 25, our tasting room in downtown Santa Cruz will open.
Wow, very cool.
So just a permit and build out and all that away, but it will happen.
Awesome.
In downtown Santa Cruz. So not that everyone wants to go down there, but it'll be a fun outlet. I guarantee that. It'll be cool.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, the website's the easiest.
Great. Yeah, go grab some wines.
Sweet.
Thanks for listening to today's episode with Ryan. If you haven't tried his wines, both the reds and the whites, you should really check them out. The Rieslings have so much vineyard personality, and the reds just taste like the Central Coast. You should also keep your eyes out for that new tasting room in Santa Cruz coming soon. For now, you can find the wines at stirmwineco.com, and you can also follow the Instagram at stirmwineco. You can follow the podcast on wherever you're listening, and the Instagram at Indie Wine Podcast. And feel free to email indiewinepodcast@gmail.com with comments, questions, or feedback. If you can tell your wine friends about the podcast too and help spread the word, I'd really appreciate it. Rating or subscribing helps too. There's also a Patreon set up if you feel like supporting the podcast monetarily to allow for more episodes, more travel, and to help defray other costs. The link is in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode. Have a good one.